Bucs, we know what the best case scenario is. They repeat as Super Bowl champs. Somebody, I don't think it was one of these questions, but somebody did pose the question last time we talked about this, right? We tend to say not everything was perfect for the Bucs last year, and it was year one of Brady, and guys got hurt, and they figured it out down the stretch. But are we overrating that too much? Maybe they did have things that also fell in their favor or whatever it is, right? I'll say
they were relatively healthy.
Yeah, they were relatively healthy, right? The biggest play that maybe turned their entire season around was the NFC Championship. Just going for it on 1 4th down opens up a Scotty Miller touchdown that maybe changes the entire game. So there's always like one or two plays you could point to. Will the Bucs repeat? It's tough to repeat.
And that was close,
what needs
by
to
the
go
way.
right
Like
here?
that was still a 31-26 game.
It's a very close game.
Like,
there's always things that
when you
could
get
go
to the
either way.
playoffs, and in particular like the championship games, any team can win. Like you're not guaranteed a spot just because you are on paper the better side.
There was also a point where we were questioning the Bucs play calling. Were they running it too much with such a pass-heavy group of players? They scored 3 points against the Saints and got wrecked on Sunday Night Football. Again, it wasn't a cakewalk throughout the season, but the way they were trending down the stretch was very favorable for this year, I think.
They are a case. They're a little bit like Josh Allen, right? Where the pattern fits fits expectations. So the narrative is, well, Josh Allen started off rough. He was a raw quarterback. He took a step forward in year 2 and then put it all together year 3. And now he's a superstar, and you hand him the $260 million contract or whatever it was, and everything's rosy. With the Bucs, the narrative was what I was pushing all season, which is, look, they didn't have an offseason. This is year 1 of Tom Brady meshing with Bruce Arians. Tom Brady's run the same system for 20 years. This is a completely different one. Injuries, these guys are coming back. Like all of this was supposed to take time to come together. And the Bucs struggled early in the season. And then it was a case of, look, all they need to do is to get to the playoffs and make sure that by the time they get there, everything has come together and they've got some answers. Then that's exactly what happened. They went undefeated down the stretch, through the playoffs, win the Super Bowl. So it fits. Like it fits the template, the narrative, the pattern that we're expecting to see. So logically, you're like, well, that means that won't happen again. But it's equally possible that it was coincidence, right? That when they struggled just happened to be earlier in the season.
Right.
And actually, that could just be the variance of football, and we might see them struggle for 5-6 games again this year. Maybe not at the start, maybe in the middle or at the end.
Well, because a big part of their success down the stretch, they played the Falcons twice, one of the worst defenses in the league. Remember their game against the Lions late in the season? Brady didn't even have to play in the second half. They just destroyed them so badly in the first half. The Lions were a mess. So a lot of it could have been, who they played or whatever.
Sure.
But from a team building standpoint, when you have a very good, well-rounded roster and you bring everybody back, you're getting a lot of check marks as far as your offseason work. So the Bucs did a lot. They did a lot of good work to keep this team intact. It's a good, solid offensive line. Brady had the number 2 grade in the NFL last year at quarterback. We always talk about loading up on playmakers. Here, go cover. Mike Evans, Antonio Brown, Chris Godwin. We debated earlier in the year. We're like, who's the number 1? Like, how do you even rank these Bucs receivers? And I have this thing. I have this feeling that, or I just have this thing about like Antonio Brown just feels like the third option, right? Just because like Evans and Godwin were there. Antonio Brown might end up being the best receiver because even though he's getting older and he's a few years removed from being that good, he might be the best receiver on this team by the end of the year. He's getting behind people left and right. He dropped one the other night, but I think he's going to be their deep threat here. The Bucs are going to be really tough to cover, and so it's going to take Brady looking 44 for things to not go well here.
Yeah.
I think.
What is their biggest question mark?
It's a cop-out to say health. I would say, though, like even if everybody's healthy, it always comes down to the secondary fluctuating in performance. So if the Carlton Davis, on paper, things look good, right? Carlton Davis and Jamel Dean, still young, upward trend. Sean Murphy-Bunting's the slot. There was more good than bad last year, but they weren't a dominant secondary. We know that secondary play can just fluctuate a little bit. Antoine Winfield heads into year 2. Jordan Whitehead was pretty good. That, I think, would be the question mark. Would be the back 7 overall.
Their biggest
just isn't a great unit. And if they're a mid-tier unit, maybe they lose a few more games than they should.
Their biggest question mark essentially is all the stuff we just talked about with the pattern. Like, is that actually true, or are they less good than we thought they were last year because of the order in which everything happened, right? That they struggled early, they put it all together, they went undefeated down the stretch, and they won the Super Bowl. So it looks, pattern-wise, it looks like this team now is the best team in the NFL and will be throughout this season because you won't have the struggles earlier in the year. Alternatively, are those struggles still going to exist? They'll just be distributed differently, and actually this Bucs team isn't quite as good as it looked last year and maybe isn't the best team in the NFL with the best roster in the NFL. And, you know, whereas right now they're seen as like level pegging with the Chiefs, maybe in reality they're a step behind the Chiefs, but because the way the good and the bad was distributed last season, we think that they're going to be as good as the good end the whole way through.
The other piece is, will they be too conservative, right? So, yes, they just won the Super Bowl, but let's also, the NFC Championship game, again, it was a lot of run, pass, run, pass, which generally is not a good formula. But Brady kept converting third down after third down in that entire first half when they scored a lot of points. Does Byron Leftwich, as offensive coordinator, does he open things up a little bit? Does Brady have a little bit more leeway? We did see that at times down the stretch. How much does it become more Brady's offense? We were asking this last year, but those two things, right? So is there less run-pass balance, so to speak, which might be better for the Bucs? Because how do you cover all these guys, right? And then the other part, though, Brady had the most deep yards of any quarterback in the league. Does that come back down to earth a little bit? Again, on paper, it shouldn't, because he doesn't have to perform great to just put the ball up and let Mike Evans and Brown and Godwin make plays, and O.J. Howard coming back, and Gronk, and Cameron Brate. By the way, Scotty Miller, too, right, who gets behind the defense once or twice a game and added a ton of big playability. So there's just a lot to like on paper, with a lot of the question marks being essentially variance and do the Bucs get in their own way with maybe from a play calling standpoint.
And I've said this before, that I think this offense is uniquely well situated to overcome run, pass in the way that others aren't, because they're designed to have big chunk plays in the pass game. So if you put them in 3rd and 8, it's different to putting a random other offense in 3rd and 8, where it becomes like one of their longest sort of average pass plays, to pick up the first down. For the Bucs, like 3rd and 8 is where they live anyway. So it's not as big a deal.
They're not, from like the analytics world, they don't use a ton of motion. They might run a little bit more than they should. But from a schematic standpoint, the Arian system, I think, does do a good job of stacking receivers and creating free releases and doing some other stuff that does favor the receivers. So while like make sure you do this, and like the axioms that you would go down this checklist from the analytics community doesn't look good on paper, I think there are other things that the Bucs do schematically that are good. The other thing that they were really bad at last year, they had the worst group of receiving running backs in the league last year. Ronald Jones and Leonard Fournette could not catch the ball. And other than Ronald Jones, he broke away for a touchdown one time. I mean, it's like they were just terrible all around. They bring in Giovanni Bernard. If he ends up just catching the checkdowns, because the Arian system is checkdowns are heavily a part of that, right? You look vertical, and then you dump it off to the back, you pick up 5 or 6. If Giovanni Bernard just catches those passes, this offense is more efficient this year. So to me, it's all about the core stuff's in place, improve some of the stuff around the edges, and the Bucs should be, one of the best teams in the league.